reporting back. So maybe now I can introduce Professor Sabelo. Wait a minute. I will very briefly introduce to you our invited speaker. Okay, so Professor Sabelo is currently Professor and Chair of Epistemologies of the Global South, with emphasis on Africa and Vice Dean of Research in the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence at the University of Beirut in Germany. Professor Extraordinarius at the Center for Gender and African Studies at the University of Free State in South Africa. Honorary Professor in the School of Education, Education and Development Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Research Associate at the Ali Masrui Center for Higher Education at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and Research Associate at the Ferguson Center for African and Asian Studies at the Open University in the United Kingdom. He is a fellow of the Academy of Science of South Africa and the Zimbabwe Academy of Sciences. Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni is a prolific scholar with 100 publications, including more than 20 books to his name. His latest publications include Epistemic Freedom in Africa, the Provincialization and Decolonization, Development and Knowledge in Africa, Turning Over a New Leaf, Marxism and Decolonization in the 21st Century, Living Theories and True Ideas, co-edited with Morgan Ndlovu, and Beyond the Coloniality of Internationalism, Rewarding the World from the Global South. The leading African historian, Professor Tojin Falola, has written a book-length study on his work entitled Sabelo Ndlovu-Gatsheni and the Colonial African Studies. Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni, for us it's a real honor to have you here. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for the invitation. And I must, of course, apologize that I could not come physically because of other commitments. I'm actually in the process of changing jobs from University of Beirut here to University of Calgary in Canada. So everything is hectic for me. But I will try to make sure that I speak in such a way that you feel like you are together. In other words, I won't lecture to you. I will actually make interventions. I spoke to a colleague of yours down there. I think her name is Maria. And I said, if you call me for a workshop, it is not me who works. I actually facilitate others to work. But before I do that, which we will do during the Q&A, I will make a number of interventions which will actually guide us as we engage with this important theme of decolonizing research practices. Of course, I must already begin to say that I won't speak directly to the field of international forestry policy. What I'm going to do is I will speak in a broad sense on what I think are the main issues which actually makes us think deeply about why we should decolonize our research practices and research methodologies, and why we should even change the way we know what we know. So I will make 4 interventions if time allows. The first intervention which I'm going to make relates to the broader issue of the contemporary politics of knowledge. I think this question of decolonizing research practices cannot be understood outside that. We will need to locate it very well within what I've called the contemporary politics of knowledge, so that we understand the implications of that. Then secondly, of course, when you begin to say decolonizing research methodologies or research practices, there is an assumption, and the assumption is that knowledge is colonized. So I will also reflect on the question of how is knowledge colonized. Some people agree that knowledge is colonized, others don't think it can be colonized. So we can't just take it for granted that we just need to decolonize knowledge without first of all making a strong case that knowledge is colonized in a particular way. And then the third intervention which I'm going to make relates to the issue of decolonization itself. What does it mean to decolonize? So I will also give various points on that. And then finally, which is the task of all of us, is then after we have listened to what I've said, we will need to bring our heads together to say, how applicable is this to research practices in general, and in particular, how applicable is this to research in forestry? And thirdly, how applicable is this to rethinking and unthinking forestry policy? I hope that will satisfy Kaisa, who actually invited me to speak here. Let me start with the first set of interventions. I think all of you who are here, you have one way or the other heard about this issue of decolonizing. And one of the issues is that there are people who are saying this issue of decolonizing has become a slogan. It has become a metaphor for many things. It has become a bandwagon. It has become a fad. If we are carried over by this, therefore we miss the understanding why there is resurgence and the insurgent decolonization in the 21st century. And I want to make a few reflections on that. I think we are not just waking up in the morning to think about decolonizing, whether it's knowledge, whether it's power, whether it's being, whether it's methodology. We need to actually make a strong case of why we need to decolonize. I think there are various reasons, and I can't exhaust them. But the first one, which I want to say, is that we're thinking about decolonization. It doesn't emerge from the sky. It actually emerges from realities of today. And one of the realities of today, you can disagree with me, is that we are living under what some, like Arturo Escobar, would call a civilizational crisis. A civilizational crisis in which we are besieged by various modern problems. And we are really under pressure to find the sources and the origins and the genealogies of these modern problems which are besieging us. So there is that issue of a civilizational crisis. And then this is linked also to what some will call the crisis of modernity itself. The modernity were all modern subjects produced by this modernity, but it is actually in crisis. And if you allow me to invoke the words of Arturo Escobar, a modernity which has created more modern problems without offering modern solutions. That is one issue to put it. And with reference to international forestry policy, I think we are meeting to think about it within a context in which there is escalating ecological crisis. Some will call it environmental crisis. The combustion of the planet Earth itself, threatening the very survival of us as human beings. So I'm bringing all this so that you don't think about decolonization as something which is just a bad weapon, something which you need just to follow. It is an attempt, one of the concepts which have re-emerged within a context in which we are trying to make head and tail of the challenges which are facing us. Of course, you have heard others speaking about Anthropocene, the Anthropocene, that this dominance of the human species being themselves maybe their worst enemies, their own worst enemies. And it is important that we need to use knowledge to actually see how are we undermining ourselves in the process. And from the knowledge domain, all this then lead, particularly from my own work, I also highlight the issue of epistemic crisis, the crisis of knowledge. And I think it was Immanuel Wallerstein who also, for a time ago, is it 204, introduced the concept of uncertainties of knowledges, the uncertainties of knowledges. And I think whenever somebody raises this idea of decolonization being a slogan, being a bad weapon, being a fad, being a metaphor, it is important that we say, but we are thinking about it not because it is a fashion. We are thinking about it because they are real, concrete, existential, epistemic, structural, systemic issues which are confronting us. And this takes us, because when we're talking here about decolonizing research practices, what taking just a small piece out of the broader decolonization question. And this piece actually takes us, it is not possible to talk about decolonizing research practices without talking about knowledge itself, without talking about the knowledge domain itself, particularly the fact that maybe the existing knowledge, which took us for the past 500 years or more, has plunged us into all these sort of problems. And the search is, how do we come out of these problems? I think some who have written before me have said that knowledge which plunges you into a crisis might not necessarily be the same knowledges which takes you out of the crisis. So when you now relate it to the forest research, you need to argue strongly to say the knowledges which made us to attack the forests, the knowledges which made us to cut the trees, can they be the same knowledges which make us to preserve them? So it will be important to think that way. And they also that at the moment you find from all over the world, there is a questioning of our knowledge of knowledge itself, if I can put it that way. And also there is pressure on us because we're all modern subjects, were all produced by modern universities. And as products of the modern universities, the way we know is very hard for us to unknow what we already know, whether it is resolving the problems or not. But we have a challenge that there are people who are saying, but at this juncture, at the current conjuncture, we need to rethink thinking itself. So it is important to rethink thinking itself. And again, to bring Wallerstein into that, he was the one who said we need to rethink thinking itself. But quickly he said, this is normal in the research practices. It is normal to rethink thinking itself because we always do that when we have new evidence coming. But he then said what is lacking is to unthink thinking itself. And that is the challenge which is facing us. Then from the indigenous peoples and the social movements, they then brought the other concept, which is the concept of of learning to unlearn what we've learned in order to relearn. We don't want to be decadent, that we all realize that there is a problem of ecological problem, but at the same time, we are refusing to unlearn some of the ways which actually threaten to finish the forest. And I'm raising this because I want us to then speak about in terms of research practices. There is no way we can change or decolonize our research practices unless we really understand the enormity of the issues we are facing, particularly the return of the basic epistemological questions. back into the academy. And I've been struggling for some time to delineate those basic research questions, which or epistemological questions, which have returned. And I'm saying they are returned, and I'm also picking from Immanuel Wallerstein when I'm talking about their return, because they've always been there. The issue is they've come back, which fundamentally means maybe we did not give them adequate responses or answers. And these questions, basic as they sound, I think they challenge us to really give better answers this time. And I will try to outline, is it 5 of them, if not 4 of them. One is, where does knowledge come from? I think that's a basic question. The second one is the most haunting one at the moment. Is there any link between knowledge and identity? We know all these people who say post-colonial theory, decolonial theory, intersectional theory, critical race theory. They always say, no, this is not science. It is not driven by science. It is driven more by identity. So we need to answer that question. Is there any link between knowledge and the identity? And the third one is also an important question of today, but it has always been there, is the question of, does knowledge have a geography? What is the relationship between knowledge and geography? And then, of course, the other important question which is linked to that of identity is the question of experience and the knowledge, or what some will call biography and the knowledge. Does knowledge have a biography, so to speak? And then, of course, the other important question, long-standing one, maybe this one was responded to adequately, is the question of the link between knowledge and the ideology. And then, of course, speaking at this moment in time, there is no way you cannot think deeply about the link between knowledge and the technology. It is very important. So these to me are the basic epistemological questions which have returned. And when we are thinking about decolonizing research practices, we need to think very deeply about these. And quickly, I will say that the responses which have been given to these questions, some of them, we know them very well. One which was never resolved, the egg-chicken type, does knowledge emerge from matter, idea, body, or mind? That is one part. The second part is, whenever you talk about identity, then the flag of objectivity, scientificity is raised. Detachment, disembodiedness is raised. And all these have implications for research methodology, for conceptions of knowledge. Then when it comes to geography, obviously, the previous responses was that we need to produce universal knowledge, knowledge which makes sense across space and time. And then when it comes to experience, obviously, the answer was subjectivity. If you bring your experience, how do you deal with the question of subjectivity? You are not being scientific, objectivity and all that. And then, of course, with the ideology, I think Michel Foucault and others, they have helped us to think that knowledge is political. This is why I'm speaking about the politics of knowledge. But at the current moment, from a decolonial point of view, from a post-colonial theorization, what are the issues which have come vis-a-vis these very questions? If you read the work of scholars like Walter D. Mignolo and the others, they will tell you that knowledge frames reality. When they try to answer the question of where does knowledge come from, they will say knowledge frames reality, or they will put it in a more philosophical manner, and they say epistemology frames ontology. That's another area where we need to think about it. When knowledge frames reality, when epistemology frames ontology, it means knowledge is very important. And you remember that in their book with Catherine Welsh, they even give the example of the puppet and the puppeteer. That what you would see is the puppets playing on the stage, but you don't see what is hidden behind. And the knowledge operates like that. That which is hidden behind makes things happen on the surface. And it therefore means that when we privilege the question of the epistemic, we're trying to say there is something hidden which we need to bring to the fore in the domain of knowledge. And then when it comes to the issue of identity and the knowledge, of course, in the decolonial and the post-colonial thought, there is confidence that we need to be clear, and then we need to say that there is eco-politics of knowledge. There is body politics of knowledge. Knowledge is embodied. Knowledge has a locus of enunciation. I can go on and go on. But when it comes to geography, again, from a decolonial point of view, there is the privileging of the idea that knowledge is a geography, the geopolitics of knowledge, the geography of knowledge, the situatedness of knowledge, which comes also from the feminist scholarship, which we need to bring in here as well. And then when it comes to experience, the idea of body politics, the biography of knowledge, who are the people who produce the dominant theory? Are they white men? Where are the women? Where are the other people of color in this production of knowledge? So it's an important question like that. I can go on and on about that, but that's what I wanted to say, that that is the basis from which we need to think about these issues if we are to diffuse this idea that we're just engaged in a bad work or in fed or in slogans. That they are deep epistemological questions which we need to think about. And then my second set of interventions for this workshop is the fundamental question: can knowledge be colonized? I think that I will move very fast. It looks like maybe here I'm talking to converted people already who already accept that it can be colonized. But the issue is how is it colonized? What concepts can we use to understand this colonization of knowledge? Of course, from various scholars, I always privilege this concept of the cognitive empire, the empire which comes, which intervenes in the universes of the world, actually focusing on the targets and on these targets and the victims. It actually destroys their way of knowing and imposes another way of knowing. That is the simplest I can put it. Once it does that, it affects the consciousness. It affects the world views, the way we see the world. And the Latin American modernity coloniality program and the Latin American group, they then came up with this concept of coloniality of knowledge. That in order to underscore this issue that knowledge can be colonized. And the emerging concepts, which are themselves subject to debate, is that when we talk about coloniality of knowledge, we're talking about such things as theft of other people's history, and then presenting a universal history from a particular geography. That's one. Two, we talk also about how some knowledges were deliberately killed, appropriated. And then we speak about it using this other concept, which we need to put in quotation marks most of the time, the concept of epistemicides, the killing of other knowledges. And we can also, building on the work of Edward Said, imperialism and culture science, the killing of other cultures. We can even speak from, I developed my scholarship from the continent in Zimbabwe and in South Africa, whereby in the academy we're using languages which we don't speak at home, languages which were imposed by colonialism for research, for teaching, for learning. And then we also speak about linguicides. And the book Wathiongo always say, maybe in Africa there was no linguicide per se, it was linguifarm, whereby some languages were made to sleep, but in the African diaspora, there was a linguicide. So that's another way of speaking about this. But for the purposes of thinking about decolonizing the research practices, I think the other elements which I developed just recently, as I was grappling with this question of epistemic freedom, but what are we confronting? Concretely, what are we confronting? Because these people who are against the whole decolonial project, they will say, but what are you talking about? You need to give us the concrete elements of what we are talking about. And I thought about 5 elements, what I called the 5 problematic epistemes. The 5 problematic epistemes, what are those 5 problematic epistemes which we need to confront so that we decolonize knowledge? And the first one, I will go through this, we will discuss it at the end, is the racist episteme. There is a resilient racist episteme, which is always sometimes in the subconscious of all modern subjects. And then we have the enslaved episteme. Some call it slave episteme. I prefer to call it enslaved episteme. And from the African diaspora, of those dealing with the slavery and the others, they actually link it with the 400 years or 400 years of enslavement. And they link it more specifically to the exploitation of reproductive labor. And they link it also to the issue of biocapitalism, surrogacy, and all these other modern problems. So they say it has a history. And then you have the imperial colonial episteme. I think V.Y. Mudimbe, in the invention of Africa and also in the idea of Africa, he speaks about the colonial library as a difficult library which we try to change, but it is in us. It was imposed in us, in our practices. Unconsciously, we reproduce it. Then there is another library, not library episteme, which we normally ignore, but is a very important one. And let me take the courage to name it as the capitalist neoliberal episteme. When you begin to say, instead of talking about students, you begin to talk about inputs, you begin to talk about throughput, you begin to talk about outputs. You are actually speaking a capitalist language, and you are actually complicit in the invasion of the university by corporate and the commercialization discourses, the neoliberal, so that everything is reduced to the dollar sign, if you like. Even the publications is the number which matters, is not the profundity of what we produce. You can no longer write a book for over 20 years, you'll be fired from your job. The book must actually be produced through what we call the oven, the quick process. It must be a PhD must be produced very quickly like that, so that we fulfill the requirements of the market. And this is why I'm talking about the capitalist neoliberal episteme. And then there's another one which we also always ignore, which is also an important episteme which we need to think about. And this is the androcentric sexist episteme, the one which actually marginalizes the contribution of women, inferiorizes whatever they produce. Whenever you think about feminist thought, you also then say, no, they're emotional, there is not scientific, is all these other things. That is another episteme which we need to think about. And I thought, let me share that. And then, of course, when we do the issue of practical way in which we think about decolonizing our research practices, I think what we need to do is also, when we go into the broader archive, decolonial archive, we need to pick the usable concepts. And I think the Latin American scholars, they've given us a number of usable concepts, such as coloniality of being, the social classification, racial hierarchization, and the gendering of human population in accordance with the invented differential ontological densities. And in order to draw an invisible social pyramid in which at the top is the white races, then you have others, brown, yellow, then others who are really kicked out of the human family. And that social pyramid, if you don't take it seriously, you won't understand who was made a target of enslavement, who was made the target of genocide, who was made the target of domesticity to work in the private domain, who goes into the public domain. You won't understand that if you don't understand that pyramid. That pyramid is not, in the sociological language, is not just ordering of the world. It has a sinister motive at the center. And that social pyramid also, those who are pushed into the subhuman, into the non-human, basically then they have no knowledge, no history, no this. And when you come therefore to take that to the domain of forestry, you will find that during the colonial encounters, these people who were said to have no knowledge, no history, they were the first ones to actually defend the mountains, defend the rivers, defend all these issues. But they were accused that, no, you are actually in a state of nature, and therefore you are primitive, and therefore you need to be civilized so that you know that the human is above nature, the human is not part of nature. A very stupid argument if you look at it in terms of the consequences of today. Because it meant that therefore nature is reduced into a natural resource in which you can exploit it ad infinitum, ceaselessly, until you actually destroy yourselves as human beings. And now we are actually inviting colleagues to go back to say, let's rethink these people who were actually defending the environment, defending the mountains, telling us in straight forms that a mountain is a being, a river is a being, a tree is a being, and we are beings among other beings. Let's not actually have this false superiority complex that human beings are the only beings, and therefore they can do anything to other beings. And this is the crisis which we're facing, whether you call it Anthropocene or whatever, but that's what I'm trying to explain. And then the other issue which needs to be taken seriously when we think about the issue of decolonizing our research practices is that at the current moment, we are actually talking about the global economy of knowledge. And in this global economy of knowledge, from where I'm working here in Germany, there's a lot of talk about collaboration, partnerships, the attempt to resolve this uneven intellectual division of labor, the uneven academic relations, the asymmetrical relations between those in the global south and those in the global north, which are actually cemented by a uneven political economy itself, with the material question itself. And within this, again, it is important that when we're thinking about changing the practices, we need to know that what I called the epistemes, the problematic epistemes, are actually structures. And you cannot resolve them by just saying, I've now hired Sabelo at the University of Bayreuth, so we've brought them into the table, without necessarily changing the contents of the table and the structures and everything which actually operates there. I will move very fast because sometimes when I start speaking about these things, I don't keep quiet. But let me try to move fast to then the main question of decolonizing, which fundamentally says, and I will anchor it from the work of Ngukwathiong. And Ngukwathiong's idea, when he introduced the issue of decolonizing the mind, he said, we need to make a very simple and straightforward assessment. We have to coldly and consciously look at what imperialism have been doing to us and our view of ourselves in the universe. So in other words, what I was trying to open up is that let's not think about forestry. There are so many things which we need to think about. Forest is one of them. But there are many other things which we need to think about, which are actually subjected to extractivism. And he then said, when we talk about decolonization, we're talking about this search for a liberatory perspective within which to see ourselves clearly in relationship to ourselves and the other selves in the universe. And the forestry is one of part of the beings and the selves in the universe. Others will talk about it in terms of the lungs of the planet. I think I saw that in the work of Achille Mbembe, the lungs of the planet. How do we? That's a being. It is like in your body, you have the liver, you have the intestines, then you have the lungs. So the planet also have all these other organs, and you can't actually want to privilege one organ by destroying the other. And he also says that when we decolonize, we're not entering into a nationalist argument or a romantic argument. We're actually entering into the question of relevance. How can we produce relevant knowledge? And then the other element which we need to think about when we think about decolonizing our practices, we need to go back to foundational question: who produces the knowledge? From where? If you go to scholars like Ramon Grossvogel and others, they will just tell you that it is we actually use knowledge from a minority world, the global north, that is Europe and North America. And they also unpack it and they say, even in this one, it is dead white men who produce the fundamental theories and the concepts. Even the women in Europe are also marginal as theorists, as producers of knowledge. And then they say, what about if we open up and open up to the majority world, to the global south, and they also search for what is usable from those parts of the world? This is what another element of decolonizing the practices. And when you go now to the knowledges from the global south, you will find that we're talking about knowledges which are produced in a resistance to extractivism, resistance to racism, resistance to enslavement, resistance to heteropatriarchal sexism, resistance to neoliberal interventions. And because of that, these knowledges are actually more closer to the agenda of survival of humanity. They are not just abstract knowledges produced in air-conditioned lecture rooms as such. They are knowledges which are produced, to use Hamid Dabashi, in tears and in blood. And because of that, they are really nearer to the resolution of the issues which we are talking about when we talk about the consequences of extractivism. And the idea of decolonizing knowledge is not to then say Europe must die, North America must die, the thinkers from Europe must not be listened to. It is not as simple as that. The idea is, to use the words of Boaventura de Santos, ecologies of knowledges. How do we bring ecologies of knowledges? It is not by bringing Sabelo on the table, to bring women on the table, on a patriarchal table. If you do that, you are actually tinkering with the margins of the problem. The issue is, these ones which were disqualified, they were disqualified on what basis? And the basis was that they are parochial, they are too local, they are not objective. But in order now to have us talk really in serious terms, we say, but which knowledge is not partial? Which knowledge is not incomplete? So all knowledges are incomplete, and therefore, the knowledge of Europe is incomplete. It can't actually be the knowledge of the rest of the world. The knowledge from Africa are incomplete. And it is that which brings us into the ecologies of knowledges in the academy. And then, obviously, when you invited me to speak in this big important moment on the international forest policy, the issue which came to my mind is, how do we practice knowledge in such a way that we are not constrained by disciplines? I remember when I talked to Maria, I said, you are talking about scientists. I'm not a scientist. I'm actually, if it goes by discipline, I was trained in history. But the moment we are in, we need really to think beyond the disciplines. In other words, we need to go into the problems which affect humanity and think from there. Let's not, I'm using lenses here in my eyes. They limit me in terms of what I see and what I other. And the disciplines are like that. They can limit you in terms of what you can see. This is why I'm trying to open the canvas as wide as possible. And as I conclude, I want also to say, when we think about decolonizing the research practices, we must think about the structural issues, the systemic issues, the institutional issues. Then we also speak about the epistemic issues. And we need to also speak about the interpersonal issues, the relational issues. And I want to end by saying, having said all this, how applicable is this to the work which we do? One. Two, how applicable is this to rethinking and unthinking international forestry policy? And where do we start? Because a lot of people have given lectures on decolonizing knowledge, decolonizing methodology. But people want really to say, where do you start? The problem is not the forest. The problem is us. And if the problem is us, it starts with us. And it means decolonizing means decolonizing the minds of the researchers, changing the consciousness, their consciousness of the world, of other people, other beings, and other selves. And practically, what does that mean? It means we begin to be always reflexive about the questions of racism, the questions of sexism, and the questions of capitalist logics that actually influence the way we think, the way we do our research. And to me, that is a good starting point, because the problematic knowledges that we are working with, we are involved, we are complicit in them. And this is why this concept of learning to unlearn in order to relearn becomes a painstaking personal process. I cannot stand here or speak like this and create an impression that I'm one of the most decolonized persons. I'm also a product of the modern university. I was taught all these other ways of doing things. I was even taught methodologies which are extractivist. Go and extract data. And I was actually taught that there's something called raw data lying there among primitive people. There is no knowledge. It's raw data. Go and take it, bring it here, process it into theory, process it into models, and then you must take those models back to those spaces. And that's what we need to unlearn in order to change our research practices. And I will also want to say that when we change methodology particularly, we are actually changing from the traditional subject-object extractive relations and embracing the subject-to-subject relations, predicted on respect, on ethics, on empathy, on justice, and on co-production of knowledge. And that we need to really cook ourselves in such a way that it becomes really not something which we think about at other moments, and then at other moments we don't think about. And with these words, I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Okay, Professor Sabelo, thank you so much for such a wonderful intervention. For sure, so many aspects, concepts that we need to reflect on while conducting research, and including, of course, our identity, our positionality. as part of our work. Very likely we will need a bit more of time to go through all of these concepts, thoughts, but I would like to now open the floor for some questions, comments, quick reactions that you would like to bring here. For those who are online, please feel free to open your mic or to write your comments through the chat. So let's allocate 10 to 15 minutes just to cover comments or questions that may have in the audience. Aino, over there.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice presentation and the great, very interesting talk. I have a clarification question regarding the 5 problematic epistemes that you explained earlier. What's the difference between the enslaved episteme and the imperial colonial episteme? It just wasn't very clear to me. Thank you.
In fact, that's an important question, and thank you for asking it. Because for analytical purposes, I had to list them like that. But when we think about them, they are inextricably intertwined. But we distill them as into one for analytical purposes. It doesn't mean that they are not related to one another. All of them are imbricated in one another.
Niti has also raised her hand. Niti, please.
Thank you very much for your talk. I had come across your epistemic liberation, and you gave me permission to decenter myself from Eurocentrism and to write from where I speak. I have one question. You said that when we change our methodology, we are also changing our relationship between the subject-object to subject-subject. Is there a citation or more reading for this that you have?
Yeah. In fact, there are two very useful books. I think the one is an old, long-standing work, which we need to revisit and revisit many times, by Linda Twy-Smith, Decolonizing Methodologies. And also, there is another one by Bagele Chilisa from Botswana, which also speak about that. There are a few of them now, which really help us to rethink the way we do research.
Thank you. Any other comment or question? We have one comment on our chat from Roseana Vento. Thank you very much, Professor Ndlovu-Gatsheni, for your very interesting presentation. You brought up the issue of extractive research methodologies that are used. How would you advise us in universities to work towards being less extractive? How would you advise Global South diaspora, especially at master's level, who are encouraged to go collect data to respond?
Yeah, it's a very important question and a very practical one, because at the moment I'm also teaching at a university, and I also do supervision of master's doctoral honors. One issue for certain which I can share is that I have seen, particularly students who come from the continent, most of them, they come here, and particularly at University of Bayreuth, and then they want to go and do research where they were born, in their countries, and they call that field work, entering into the field. I think what we need to try to change, a colleague put it in a more jocular way when we were in Mozambique recently. He said, but if Sabelo goes and do research in Zimbabwe, that is not field work, that is homework. And they say the homework and the field work are two different things. You are not entering what you don't know totally. You are entering a terrain which you already know, and you have different questions from somebody who really approaches it as a field. So we need to think that way. But the second issue is also to lower our superiority as human beings. And when we think about knowledge, we think about ourselves as students of society. How does being a student of society mean than being an expert? You see, you need to change these two. Being a student of society rather than approaching the world as an expert. Because if you approach it as an expert, already you know, the other party knows nothing. So this is where, when we become student of society, everywhere we go to learn, listen, and we take a positionality that the people whom we interact with, they have knowledge, they have something to share with you, with me, which is very different from when I grew up. When I went to the university, I thought I would go to the university, acquire degrees, then I come back to society to teach, not to learn. But nowadays, I know that I'm perpetually a student of society, and that positionality makes me really to learn so many things. It makes me not close my mind to hearing new things, and I hear new things every time when I adopt this humble position in the production of knowledge, in the generation of knowledge. And this is where the issue of co-production. I'm also creating knowledge out of the interaction, but people shared with me knowledge. They didn't share with me raw data. There's nothing called raw data. What would be raw data, as far as I'm concerned? I think that's a dangerous term. It actually smells extractive by its very name, raw data, like raw materials. We need to rethink that positionality.
Thank you. Now we have a final question here in our in-person audience, please.
Yes, thank you, Professor Sabelo, for your presentation. My question is more a conceptual one, because I understand this the approach, the decolonizing approach, from maybe a constructivist perspective.
Mm.
For me, it's not yet clear how it looks like the final process. How something can be decolonized and how it looks like at the end. What's the goal? If I can be clear on my question, if there is a goal, if it's only the process, or if it's the reflection that is the goal, or how it looks like at the end.
Yeah, in fact, so many people are running to the end product, and I think what I'm presenting here is process. The end product, I want to prescribe. I want to prescribe. If you change the way you generate knowledge, obviously, the end product won't be similar to the way you approached it. So I don't think we need to jump to the end to say that's a judgmental approach to things. A judgmental approach which smells really of arrogance, as far as I'm concerned. When you do whatever you do using Eurocentric approaches, do you always run into the end product at the end?
Okay, so I'm sure that there are more comments and questions, but perhaps we can keep them for the second part of our workshop, for the group discussions. Now, I would like to once again thank you, Professor Sabelo, for your time, for such a wonderful speech. For sure, this will give us enough food for thought for the second part of our workshop, but also for reflecting more in our research. Now I would like to invite our audience, both in person and online, to take a 15 minutes break before moving on to the group discussion. Thank you so much.
I learned a lot through the interactions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we can meet again in 15 minutes. Now we invite you to take, for those in person, a coffee break and to start already the discussion. Why not?